Runaway slaves who reach the North are still not free. The Constitution and the Fugitive Slave Law of 1793 require that runaways caught, even in free states, should be returned.
Slave catching in the North, of course, evolves over time. In the early days, there were actually these gangs of slave catchers that roamed the North, especially northern cities and especially areas of black communities, and sometimes kidnapping, sometimes capturing fugitive slaves, and they did this for money.
But slave catchers aren't always successful. In the South, they were pitted against individual slaves. In the North, they faced hostile and protective African American and abolitionist communities. Abolition had begun among Quakers in the 1730s, and in the 1800s, other activists joined that movement. This was especially true in Boston.
Boston is not a safe place for slave catchers to operate. When slave catchers were in town, there were posters that went up, they were advertised in the newspapers, all kinds of notifications to free blacks. There are slave catchers in town, beware. And almost instantly, blacks and sometimes whites formed as groups to protect fugitives.
When a slave catcher is spotted, he is quickly followed and harassed by African Americans and white abolitionists. Announcements ring out from the pulpits of black churches. Many in the black and abolitionist communities moved closer to armed self-defense, including Frederick Douglass, the noted abolitionist and fugitive slave, who proclaimed,
"The only way to make the fugitive slave law a dead letter is to make a few dead slave catchers."
South Carolinians are confronted by the militant resistance to this law when they try to capture William and Ellen Craft. William and Ellen Craft had escaped from slavery and traveled nearly 1,000 miles from Macon, Georgia to Boston. The light-skinned Ellen passed as white, with her husband William as her slave. When their owners found out they were in Boston, they sent 2 slave catchers, John Knight and Willis Hughes, to bring them back. Knight and Hughes are determined, declaring, "If we have to stay here to all eternity, and if there are not enough men in Massachusetts to take them, we will bring some up from the South." Hughes and Knight tracked the Crafts to the home of Lewis Hayden. Hayden and his wife, both escaped slaves, were known to hide more than a dozen fugitives at a time. Hayden was also known to use any means to protect them, and he has barricaded his house.
He places on either side of his front door kegs of explosives, and he stands there with lighted torch, and he says, "You enter this home at your peril." He threatens to explode the house, to kill everybody in the house, including the slave catchers, if the slave catchers attempt to enter.
Backup soon arrives. The Vigilance Committee, a group of mainly black Bostonians, rushes to the Hayden's house. The committee's activities were secret, but the group had successfully rescued other fugitive slaves.
Together, they discourage the activities of the fugitive slave catchers and drive them out of the city.
William and Ellen Craft are spirited away, eventually sailing to England and to freedom. Despite victories like the Crafts, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act has a devastating effect on the black community. 15,000 black people flee the United States. In Boston, the 12th Street Baptist Church, one of the city's largest African American churches, loses fully 1/3 of its congregation. Though the ranks of the resistors have been drained, their spirit remains.